Shopify grows your business no matter how far or big you grow. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Whether you're selling your fans' next favorite shirt or an exclusive piece of podcast merch, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. Allbirds, Rothy's, Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in.
When it comes to running long distances, there's not an animal on the planet that's better than humans. Yes, the cheetah, the horse, and even the ostrich are much faster at shorter distances, but humans can outlast them all. A big part of that comes from our ability to keep cool through sweat. But the other part, which perhaps is even more important, comes from our big brains. We have the ability to conceptualize abstract thoughts, plan for the future, and learn from our experiences. We can imagine what it will be like to run a marathon, make a plan to achieve it, and then learn from the experience to get better at it the next time. And this is the beauty of running, especially if you have fallen in love with it later in life. You can get better at it by not only training your legs, but your brain as well. I would argue that the number one thing your brain needs to get really, really good at racing your best is pacing. I did an episode a few weeks ago all about how important pacing is to your running and your life, but today is going to be different. On today's episode of the Planted Runner podcast, I invited the runner who literally wrote the book on pacing to teach you how to do it right. Matt Fitzgerald has written over 30 books to date on everything to do with running, and his new one, On Pace, Discover How to Run Every Race at Your Real Limit, is another must-read for runners. We talk about what it means to pace properly, why most runners are naturally really bad at it, and we also go over practical techniques that you can use today to get better at it yourself. Matt is always great to talk to, and I know you'll come away from this conversation with some new ways to pace and race just a little better. And be sure to stay tuned all the way to the end of the episode, where I'll share another mental strength minute to fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. Before I get into the conversation, I wanted to ask you if you have a plan to keep your running and fitness on track this fall. You know, after the big race is over and the shorter days and colder temperatures set in. And of course, during all the holiday drama. Instead of relying on motivation or going at it alone, come join an amazing group of runners just like you on my PR team. It's a virtual running team and so much more. You'll get a truly custom plan for all your running, strength, mobility, mental strength workouts, and more, all based on your fitness, goals, and lifestyle. You'll get all your questions answered by me and our super supportive team in a private online running community. And the coolest part is that you get access to my exclusive weekly private podcast just for the team. I answer questions on the show, give training advice specific to you and the rest of the team, and you can even stay anonymous if that's more your style. It's really the sweet spot between just getting a DIY plan and full-on private coaching, even though you'll get lots of individual attention if you want it. All for as low as $75 a month. It is the perfect way to stick to your goals for the rest of the year and beyond. Not to mention, it's a ton of fun. Team spots are limited, so sign up today at theplantedrunner.com/group. That's theplantedrunner.com/group. And now here's my conversation with Matt Fitzgerald. Hey, Matt, welcome to The Planted Runner.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, so you are a prolific writer, and once again, you've come up with another great running book. This one's called On Pace. So let's talk about pacing and running. First of all, why is it so important?
Where do I begin? Like for me, I think a lot of runners think of pacing as they know what it is. They recognize that it's a skill and an important one. But for me, it's actually kind of the essence of the sport of distance running. If you think of other ways to run, for example, sprint competitions, like very short races. There's no pacing element in, a 60-meter dash, right? It's just like the goal in any race is to finish as quickly as possible. And in a short sprint, the way you finish as quickly as possible is to start at a maximum effort and sustain a maximum effort until you're done. And then if you look at, fitness running, where it's not a sport, but the goal is living longer, or stress management, or social time with someone you enjoy running with. There's no real pacing element there as well, because it's just a different kind of goal. You're just, you've got a different agenda. But in the sport of distance running, where it is a race, you are trying to finish as quickly as possible, but the race is long enough that you simply can't finish in the least time possible by running as fast as you can at any point until you're close to the finish line. So it's just, it really is, it's like the defining characteristic of running that makes it different from other forms of running. And the other thing I like to say about it, and just, making the case that it's important, is that there are really just two ways to be, quote unquote, good at running. One is to be able to run fast for a long distance. And that comes obviously from natural talent and from training. The other way to be good at running, I believe, is to be good at pacing, because pacing just allows you to get the most out of whatever ability you have. Like, you can't do anything about your genes. You can only train so much. But when you've worked so hard to get as fit as you can and you show up at the race, you don't want to waste any of that fitness. And if you pace poorly, you actually, in a sense, are wasting some of your fitness.
Yeah. This is the one place, maybe one of the places, where getting older has an advantage. You have the experience behind you. You've done it before. Because, I run with my kids, and what they do when I say go is they just take off. And then, 100 meters later, they're done. And
right.
They have they have no innate sense of pacing. Their form is excellent. They run beautifully, but they just have no sense of taking their time and planning out what they're trying to do. So if this is not an innate, ability that humans have, how do we develop it?
Experience. You said it. Experience is number one. Nobody is great at pacing in their first. Kids love to run, but they race each other to the mailbox, or they play tag. It's always short and fast. And so that first time, whether it's at a local 1K fun run that's part of mom's or dad's 10K race. Event or whatever, like, you have that first taste of trying to, as I put it earlier, run both fast and far. And almost every kid blows it. But, the second time you try the same thing, you do a little better. And there's actually been studies where they have kids do a series of half-mile races or whatever. And sure enough, they get better every time. So experience, there's no substitute for experience. However, not every runner learns the same amount from equal experience. Experts in learning will tell you is it's learning. The way to accelerate learning through experience is through reflection. So that's a big part of what I try to encourage in my book, is actually, don't just hope don't just keep running and hope you get better at pacing. Work on it. Like if you're more mindful about your pacing while you run, and you sort of analyze after the fact, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? You can accelerate the process of becoming a better pacer.
Yeah. I had somebody make a comment. I was talking about actually breathing, helping you running, controlling your breathing. And somebody said, my dog runs great. He doesn't know how to count his breaths. Why are we learning how to do this? And I did not respond the way I wanted to, but I wanted to say, like, humans actually are better than dogs at endurance. We are one of the best species on the planet at endurance. And do you think it's because of our ability to reflect on it?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I mentioned in the book is that, you look at other animals in horse racing, there's a reason that horses have jockeys riding them. It's because, horses they don't have the brain power to comprehend abstract distances. Like, they don't know what a furlong is. Right. People do, in dog racing, they have to, they have like a rabbit or something that they're chasing. Like, if they don't see the rabbit, they don't know how fast to go.
Right.
And so, yes, it is unique. There was a study I mentioned in the book where they look at like cheetahs in the wild and their hunting behavior, and they showed how like they have a sense of pacing as well. Like young cheetahs, they don't know when to quit. If they're not gonna get that particular gazelle, they just keep going until they're exhausted. Whereas older ones who have experience, they like, what, this ain't working. I'll try again tomorrow. So, even the animals can learn, but again, like the cheetah has to see the gazelle. You can't just say, run the fastest marathon you can, cheetah. It doesn't work that way. So yeah, there is something like we can all species can do it in one way or another, but humans can do it in a kind of more sophisticated way. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, the thing about the marathon is, especially if it's your first one, most likely, or hopefully, you have never run that distance. We usually don't run the marathon distance while we train for a marathon. So there's so many unknowns, and you show up on race day and you're tapered, you're fresh, you're excited, you got the adrenaline going. And it's so hard to pace. Even though the classic advice is don't go out too fast, it is so hard to actually do it. Why do we struggle with it so much?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's sort of an extension of the idea that experience is the best teacher, because you're going to have the most experience at the shortest distances. And so the pacing challenge just becomes amplified as the distance increases. I ran my first marathon at 28, and I had, been a competitive runner as a preteen, as a high schooler. So I had running experience, but I completely blew my first marathon. I mean, I was walking like shamelessly early, like before even 19 miles, I was reduced to a walk. And my second marathon, I walked again. And it wasn't because I hadn't trained. I considered myself a pretty good runner, but I was not a pretty good marathoner until I had to learn the hard way. Now, some people do nail it the first time. I will say women more often than men.
Wasn't me. I didn't.
Yeah, right. But something that I emphasize in the book is like, it's okay to screw up. Like, actually, I like to say, the road to pacing mastery is paved with pacing errors. Like, screwing up. I mean, especially if it's a long race and you've invested, weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's going to be a while before you get another shot. Yes, it can be pretty devastating to really blow it with your pacing, but it does teach you. I was a little bit slow on the uptake, but eventually I did kind of figure out how to pace a marathon.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one thing that we have the advantage of, or maybe it's a disadvantage, is we have these super fancy watches on our wrist, and we can look at our pace on our watch, assuming GPS is correct. Let's imagine it's perfect technology, which it's not. We can look and see exactly how fast we are going at any given time. So what's the problem with that? Should we, shouldn't we use our watches as the tools they are?
That's a Pandora's box because, they certainly are. I remember, I started running in 1983, and before these technologies existed, I wanted them to exist. Like I knew it was coming at some point. And so, they are very useful tools, but your watch actually doesn't know how fast you can run a marathon. It has, it has some idea, like, some of the technologies they can, pay attention to collect all your training data, and the stride power meters are really good at that. Their race predictors are pretty good, but they don't really know. And what is kind of unique about distance running and other endurance sports is that, we actually don't encounter any hard physical limits to our performance during the race if you've done it right, until the very, very end, because it's humanly impossible to sustain a true maximal effort longer than about 30 seconds. So if you're at a maximal effort before you're within 30 seconds of the finish line, you ain't finishing, or you're going to be doing like I did in my first marathon, and you'll be walking. So you're always, pacing means like intentionally holding back, and it's done by feel. And so the only limit certainly our performance is constrained by physiology, but the direct limiter we encounter is perceptual. And that's why in the book I emphasize that one of the three kind of, trait pillars of pacing ability is toughness, because the limit, when it's a perceptual limit, it's fuzzy. And you can actually, like, if a runner is more motivated, they can actually push harder. Your Garmin, I don't need to pick on Garmin. I always do. I have a Garmin. I love it, but like it doesn't know any of that. So it can certainly, like, it can be useful, but actually the runners who benefit most from their devices are the ones who actually need them less. So really, like, I encourage runners to use their device to not need it, which is counterintuitive, but that is sort of the path to just being able to listen to your own body, read your perceptions, and become truly better at pacing.
Yeah, we'll get into those three pillars in just a second, and let's go ahead and start with the first one. Body awareness. So everybody wants to know how to feel their pace, but runners are data heads. We like numbers. We like hard black and white facts. We like zeros and ones. And so feeling is, like you said, a little fuzzy. So how do we learn to do that?
Yeah, well, that is actually one of the reasons that it's best not to be too dependent on data and technology, is because it actually steals your attention away from your body. Neuroscientists refer to this phenomenon as cognitive offloading. I remember having I write professionally for a living. My dad does too. And I remember we were sort of talking shop one day and both admitting that we've gotten much better. Much worse at spelling since the advent of spell check.
Right.
And that's cognitive offloading. And so anytime you rely on something external to your brain to do something for you, you get worse at it. So part of, like, just developing body awareness is, it doesn't mean, you throw your device into the ocean, but you sort of, like, do some runs when you don't look at it. And there are also a lot of games you can play. And actually a lot of this is really gamifying training. You're finding different ways to connect what you're feeling to what you're actually doing.
Right.
So, like, guess your pace, those types of things are actually really helpful. So you're sort of calibrating that body awareness. You can rely on it more and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually used to do this. I, for some reason, got locked on the 7:30 per mile pace. And that's slower than my marathon pace, but it was more than my easy pace. And I knew that I was hitting that particular pace the way the wind felt in my hair, the way my elbows had to go back a little farther, the way I had to push off my toes. And I didn't do this on purpose. I was just, we got a lot of time to think when we're out there running. And so I was just like, I'm going to try to feel that pace. And I would look at my watch and try to get exactly on that pace just by the feeling. So, all of these little games, sometimes they seem sort of silly, but they can be super helpful,
and learning techniques like this can be a game changer, wouldn't you say?
Yes. Yeah. And, and so my sort of colloquial definition of pacing is the art of finding your limit. Like that's really what you're trying to do. And, your limit is sort of a fine line, and it's always moving, but it takes a high degree of precision. We tend to think of pacing and running as like very different from other sports skills, but like if you look at like a professional golfer who is, on their, second shot of a par 4 and their caddy says, okay, it's 185 yards to the hole. Chances are that golfer is going to hit the ball somewhere between 180 and 190 yards, like really, really close to exactly. Like, how did they do that? By consulting a watch? By running some calculations? By doing math in their head? No, it's entirely by feel. And so, it seems like sort of just like magical, but it's not magic at all. It's just a matter of a lot of like intentional practice, repetition, mindfulness, paying attention. And you can get scary good at, really, really, really refined pacing. And that is how you end up finding. So the idea is not to be great at guessing your pace. It's to find your limit in races. But those little games you play in training are really helpful tools in getting you to your limit on race day.
When you're a busy runner, it's not easy to get in all the running and training you need. On top of that, planning and preparing all the nutritious meals and snacks required to fuel you as an athlete can become an extra burden. So make it simpler on yourself and just make a shake after your workouts with the highest quality plant-based protein powder you can buy, Neurify by Prevenix. But don't just take my word for it. I recommend Neurify to all my athletes, and here's what Julietta had to say about it. It's been a month since I bought Neurify, and I'm super satisfied. This protein powder is my way to go after every run, especially those days when I cannot have breakfast immediately after my workout. I use Neurify. No GI issues, and it keeps me full until my breakfast. Highly recommended. So if you are ready to finally and deliciously hit your protein numbers, head to Prevenix.com and use my code PR15 for 15% off your entire order. That's Prevenix.com, code PR15.
Women's Running Stories, where we explore the intersection between running and life. Because every woman who is committed to a running journey has a story to tell, and this is where you'll find those stories. I am host and producer Cherie Louise Turner. I'm a 53-year-old runner, and together with original music by musician and runner Cormac O'Regan, we bring these inspirational stories to life. Please join us to fuel your adventures.
Greetings from Evergreen Podcasts. We're rolling out a listener survey, and we want to hear from you. The information in the survey will help us gather statistics and in turn make our shows more appealing to advertisers. I know most people don't like ads, but this is one of the only ways our shows make money and help keep their lights on. We promise it will only take a few minutes, but the impact on our podcasts will be tremendous. As a token of our appreciation, we'll randomly select one lucky participant each month to win an exclusive merchandise package from Evergreen Podcasts. Head to evergreenpodcast.com/listenersurvey to help a show and possibly get some free stuff for doing so. We can't thank you enough for the support. Now back to the show.
Yeah. Well, then we go to the question of, do we ever find our limits? Because, you look at the races of the fastest people in the world, and it doesn't matter what distance. It could be a sprint or it could be a marathon or whatever. And nobody's collapsing at the finish line. Yeah. They're doing the victory lap. They're dancing around. There's still energy left. Is it even possible to find our limits unless, we die at the finish line?
Yeah, it's one of the things that's enigmatic about endurance performance is that it's fundamentally unknowable. Like you cannot know, obviously, like if you really messed up a race, if you made a big mistake, okay, I could have done better. But when you take the best race you've ever done, where the execution, like you just have no regrets, like you look back on that, and even then you can't say for sure that you couldn't have gone 1 second faster,
Right.
By doing something different somewhere. Like there's just absolutely no way to know. And that's why it's just like, with your example of collapsing at the finish line. Well, what happens before you collapse? You slow down, and you start to feel terrible. So, none of this stuff is sudden. And that's why, again, the limit is so fuzzy that really, and the scientists who study pacing, who I consider the real experts, they will say that, like, there's absolutely nothing you can measure physiologically that will tell you definitively, oh, there's your limit. Like there's always different stuff going on inside your body when you feel like you're at the limit of your performance. So yeah, it's an enigma. It's a riddle. We'll never solve it.
Yeah. So let's talk about toughness. That's one of the pillars. So we are always talking about being mentally tough. The best athletes in the world are tough. They have grit. And there is something to be said about training. You put yourself through a lot of physical training, which is hard to make yourself mentally tough. But we also have to be super careful about not crossing the red line. You don't want to go to the well too often in training. Some say you should only go once or twice a year, come to Jesus moment or whatever. Yep. And so how do you get tough and train hard, but not all the time? Like, where's that balance?
Yeah, that is a great question. And, there's more than one way to come at developing toughness, but doing it, not to pick on David Goggins, but to David Goggins' way, just like trying to go as deep into the pain cave as possible every day. Most sports psychologists would say, actually, no, that's kind of self-defeating. I remember Dina Castor telling me in an interview like many years ago, she said, and I found this highly validating because I did the same thing. She said, when I'm in the early part of a training cycle, I'm cruising, I'm coasting through everything. And the closer I get to a race, I get faster in my workouts, not so much because I'm getting fitter, though I am, it's because I'm actually trying harder. So she said, I wait until I'm really, really close. I can see the start line imminent, and then I'll do, a couple workouts where I really bury myself. And then, because you have to do enough so that those feelings are familiar. You don't want that sort of pretty intense discomfort that you feel in a race to be the first time you've experienced that ever or in a very long time. So you need to go there, but you actually don't need to repeating that incessantly there's no additional benefit. And you actually you're sort of tapping out your reserves, because we all have, I don't care how tough you are, you just don't, you want to have fun sometimes.
Yes. Well, and the other hard part of really, really going too hard or going really hard to find your limit or whatever, that is basically saying you're setting yourself up in a workout to probably fail. Right. You're gonna come away from that workout. You missed your splits. You bombed out. You crashed. You blew up. Whatever you're gonna call it. And mentally, that's tough for a lot of runners. That is the hardest part. Being I absolutely blew it. Yes. How do you shift from I'm a total failure and that sucks into, well, I'm getting mentally tough? That's hard.
Yes. And that's why I really, in the book, I refer to them as limit testers. And those are training sessions that are set aside, or actually the purpose is to experience intense discomfort. So when you're looking for a particular training stimulus, I want to do so much running at such and such an intensity, in those workouts, you're not trying to beat the numbers. You're just trying to hit the numbers, because it's just one day, for crying out loud. The training process is weeks long, but there can be special occasions where you're not so concerned about performance being the purpose of the workout. It's actually a qualitative thing you're looking for. And so in a limit tester, the point is to set yourself up for a judicious dose of really hurting. One of the ones I did in 2017, I trained with the NAZ Elite professional team over the summer, and their coach, Ben Rosario, had us do a workout one day where it was I think it was 8 times 1 kilometer at kind of a moderate pace. So it was a good beefy workout that definitely, left us a little fatigued. But it wasn't like I was in good shape and I paced myself right. So I felt pretty comfortable. But then the end of the workout was a 1,500 meter all out time trial at 7,300 feet of altitude. And so, those 8 times 1K at a moderate pace kind of softened me up. And then, boy, did that 1,500 hurt, but it was over with in, 4 minutes and change. And it was a really confidence building experience. I ran a 5K race at sea level less than a week after that and won, because I felt like the race itself is like, hey, that's nothing compared to the time trial I did. But you really have to be sparing and you have to be clear about your intention. Like, this is a performance workout where I'm just trying to meet the standards. And this is a limit tester where I'm trying to just, callous my mind a little bit for discomfort.
Yeah, I think that part is really important, knowing what your goal is ahead of time, because most people just look at the workout and they're like, oh, I want to do the best I can. I want to, which means beat the numbers, go faster than what it says, and when they don't, they feel like a failure. But if you set yourself ahead of time and say, look, I'm trying to hurt here, it's kind of a different mind shift.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, that clarity is key.
Yeah. So let's talk about the third pillar, judgment. So can you really teach judgment? I mean, do you have good judgment? Is that something that we can train?
Yeah, it is. I mean, like all of these traits, there's the whole nature nurture thing. So, for me, for example, just rewinding to toughness for a second, like I was not naturally tough. Like, that was my Achilles heel as a high school runner. But I worked on it and I got a lot better. So I consider myself living proof that toughness is certainly trainable. And then, the science says judgment is the same. And in the book, I talk about a study involving tennis players where they had a coaching intervention involving videotape where they had young tennis players evaluate their decision making with a coach. And so there was a control group that didn't do that. And there was, an intervention group that did have that training and just, and that gets back to that reflectiveness. They didn't just have the experience, they reflected on the experience. And the coaches were careful to say, point out when they did something right and also when they did something wrong. And then their decision-making in matches was tracked over the course of the study. And there was a significant improvement in judgment calls in the decisions. Every point in tennis, I don't play the game, but if you watch it, it's like they're constantly making decisions. That's why you have shifts in momentum and such. And so, so that's tennis, not running, but running's no different. Like if you are just intentional about the process and what things to practice to improve your judgment, you can definitely improve.
Okay. So what are some examples of that? Are you talking about just, going out for a workout and then coming home and writing down what you felt in your training log? Or what do you mean by that? How can we practically do that?
Yep. Yeah, that's part of it. In the book, I talk about kind of like a kind of a 5-step process, and you can use this. I mean, it's especially valuable in races, but you can use it in any workout where the pacing is important. So your average Wednesday easy run, hey, just go let your mind wander, but for any kind of structured workout that's going to be challenging, step one is planning. So a lot of people who aren't good at pacing, they don't put any thought into it ahead of time. And so part of it is just, make a plan that makes sense. And that can involve things like whether you run with someone or alone. Some people will choose someone who's, faster than them and it messes up their pacing. Or like you could, an example I give in the book is like when you run, like if you have an important workout where you want to hit a time that is close to your limit and you procrastinate and wait till the hottest part of the day when it's not realistic, that's bad planning that affects your pacing. That's one. Two is what I call emotional self-regulation. Because, running hard is stressful and our emotions get involved and the specific emotions we experience can either be helpful or hurtful to our pacing and performance. So you can just be mindful about using your emotions to your advantage and reflecting afterward. Did I actually do that? Could I have done better? Number 3 is self-talk, which is kind of related. It's like there's always chatter going on in your head. And like the emotions, the chatter can be either helpful or hurtful. You can learn to regulate your self-talk in ways that help you pace better. Number 4 is what I call tactical adjustments. And those are just like, every run is unique. Like it's always a little bit different somehow than you expected. And so there will be, usually small surprises, but surprises nonetheless. And sometimes there are big surprises. And like, how well do you do in, when those surprises occur in making a proper, smart adjustment? And then the last one is your attentional focus. Like you're always paying attention to something. And, the science on that is neat because you think of it as, attention. But there's so many different ways you can pay attention to things like external, internal, physical, cognitive, emotional. And so that stuff too, like the people who are really good at pacing know how to use their attentional focus in a strategic way. So these 5 elements, you can just sort of look back on your run and say, like, how well did I do in each of these? And, give yourself a pat on the back when you did well, take yourself to task when you didn't, and try to do better next time.
Yeah. All of that stuff is great. I love every bit of that. I think that, the challenge is that our brain uses carbohydrates just like our muscles do. Yep. And too much thinking while we're running actually tires us out. So, we want to do everything that you're telling us to do. But then we're thinking, oh, wait, am I paying attention? And what am I supposed to be doing? So I think that is the real tricky part, is that we can't make too many decisions while we're running because it slows us down.
Yes, exactly. That's an excellent point. And really, if you're doing all these things right, you actually are using less brain energy. Like, so it's not like, there's these 5 things I got to do simultaneously. No, they're just 5 things and you're doing them anyway. There's no off switch for any of these things. They're happening. So it's just a matter of like, when you're doing these 5 things the way the really, really good pacers do, you're using your brain more efficiently. Like you're not wasting mental and emotional energy on things that aren't productive for your running.
Yeah. And that's also why planning is so important. So you can do the heavy mental lifting while you're not running. Make all those decisions ahead of time as much as possible, right?
Yeah. Like, a great example would be, familiarizing yourself with a race course before you run the race. Like we seldom think about this. Like, is there a home course advantage in running? And there absolutely is, because if you run somewhere you've been before, like you actually tune out. You can tune out a lot. Like, you don't have to worry about where the turn is. You know where the turn is. So that actually frees up brain energy. So that's a great example of how planning specifically can actually allow you to marshal your very finite brain resources while you're running.
Right. It's like cognitive offloading, right?
Yep. Yes.
In a good way.
Exactly. No. Yeah.
So one thing that I did, I liked one little part of the book is you talked about an athlete that you coached who actually failed to value pacing. And I don't think that this is talked about enough. And so could you share that story and what you meant by that?
Yes. Yeah. This is a runner I used to coach who was, training for a marathon where he wanted to improve. And he got really, really fit, and we set a goal, and he did the usual thing where he tried to put a little bit of time in the bank, and he ended up, he did not, end up walking like I did in my first 2 marathons, but, he lost some time, toward the end. And, I knew as his coach, if he had, just been a little more conservative in the beginning, he could have been consistent. And so his first half would have been a little slower, but his second half would have been a lot faster. And afterward, I was dismayed when, as I say in the book, like usually when an athlete of mine is satisfied with a race, I'm happy too. But this guy was happier than he should have been. He said to me, like, because I saw his data upload before we talked, and he said, Coach, I only lost a few minutes at the end. And I wanted to tear my hair out. I'm like, a few minutes?
Yeah.
Imagine that in another sport. Like I only got hit on the jaw a few extra times in the boxing match because I couldn't be bothered to keep my hands in front of my face. It's like, like, come on, it's a sport. Like, like,
Right.
like, I get it. We don't all have to be hyper aggro about it, but like, you trained really hard for this race. Like, like, what's a few minutes? A few minutes is quite a lot, as a matter of fact. So, why waste them if you don't have to? So value pacing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's harder to do. I mean, I think your value of pacing kind of goes down if your race is going south.
Yes.
You talk about your self-talk and your emotions. I mean, I had a race that I was very, very close to reaching my dream goal and ended up all by myself in the wind, in no man's land. And I was just like, oh, well, it's good enough.
Yes.
I'll be a minute short of my goal, but who cares? So you start telling yourself, you stop valuing pacing when things are going wrong. So do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, like we all go there. I mean, even Olympians have those moments. And for me, I got to the point where those are actually my favorite. I mean, I wanted every race to go well, but those were really my favorite moments as I was, when I was really a veteran runner, because that's when it actually matters to like have a strong mental game. Like, when it's going well, everyone's a mental giant. But like when things start to go sideways, that's when you have a chance to really show your stuff. I remember, for example, in the 2019 Boston Marathon, I went through a rough patch. It was a warm day. And I had enough bad marathons where I'm like, here we go again, and it was pretty early. It was like, before the halfway point. And, so I started, that negative chatter started to enter my head. But then I sort of like called a timeout on myself. I'm like, just relax. Like, so a trick I use sometimes that I think any runner could is like, take the next mile off, just like, let's just take this mile off. Like it's a 26-mile race. I'm just going to take this one off. And it doesn't mean I stop. It just means I don't look at the watch for that mile. I just focus on like, if I need to slow down to preserve the rest of the race, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to worry about my goal or anything. And sure enough, like, I came out of it, and that was the slowest part of the race for me. But whereas a younger me might have just said, no, my goal is going out the window and forced it and crashed and burned later, I was able to salvage a race. And it was because of the mental tools I developed. So that's the attitude I would encourage every runner to take. It's like, no, you don't want those bad patches to happen, but not everyone reacts to them the same way. You can either cope well or average, or you can cope poorly. Don't you want to be the runner who copes well? Because it is possible.
Yes, it is. Well, I think what most people are looking for, I mean, it's human nature. We want to read a book or listen to a podcast and get the answers and know what to do without actually doing it ourselves. But why doesn't it work that way? Why can't we talk, you and me, have this podcast, tell everybody exactly how to pace a marathon perfectly? Why can't we do it in real life?
Yeah. Well, I am so glad that is not the case. In the book, I wax a little bit poetic about how I love the word performance for what we do in races, because it really is like, it's like that old quote from Heraclitus, a man cannot cross the same river twice because it's not the same river and he's not the same man. Like, every race you do is a little different. You're not the same runner, and it's not the same race. And so, all the preparation in the world, it sure helps, but it cannot do it all for you. It cannot run the race for you. Like, the race is not run on paper. So it really is up to you. Just like any performing artist will tell you, it's like, knowing my lines is not enough to deliver a great performance. Like, every time I step on that stage, it's a high wire act. It's up to me to deliver. And I just think that's great about the sport. Like, it's a little daunting, but like, that makes it dangerous, and exciting. And it's like, it gives you the promise of improving over time. I used to wonder when I was a young runner, like, what's going to keep me motivated to compete when I'm, over 40? Well, I found out it's because I actually could keep improving, above the neck, even as the rest of my body kind of, fell apart.
Well, I think that is definitely very inspiring. So we've talked a lot about pacing, like actual pacing of running, a mile or 26.2 miles. But you also talk about macro pacing. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, macro pacing is my term just for pacing writ large. So pacing on broader timescales. The scientific definition of pacing is the goal-directed distribution and management of effort across an exercise bout. So that was a lot of words, but like those last two words are key, or three words, an exercise bout, like one run, right? That's what that's micro pacing. That's what we usually think of as pacing. But there's also, you can pace your life, and we can all think of times when we were going a mile a minute, super busy, harried and hectic, up to a lot of things. And we can also think of other times in our life when we just had a nice slow pace and there wasn't that much going on and everything in between. So that is macro pacing. And the point I try to get across in the last chapter of the book, which is on macro pacing, is if you look at runners who had incredible longevity, where they don't just reach their peak and flame out like a comet, like they stay on top. The example I start off with in that chapter is Abdirahman,
yes.
American runner who qualified for 5 Olympics, the last time at age 43.
Yes.
In the 2020 U.S. Olympic Trials Marathon. Just an incredible career. And when you study these people, it's like, okay, what's their secret? It's not a gene. It's like it's a lot of psychological stuff, like maintaining their passion for the sport. And also that you find that these people who have like really protracted primes are really balanced people. So you might think, oh, they're the ones that are super hyper obsessed with running and it's all they think about. No, actually, they're the ones who have a lot of other stuff going on. And sometimes they know when to just put the running aside for a minute and focus on something else. That actually, like that sort of pacing actually allows them to keep running well after 40 and 50 and so on.
Yeah. I've spoken with Abdi and he likes to have fun. That's his big thing is likes to have fun. And that is something that you also talked about in the book. Why is fun so important? We are so obsessed with running and getting better and getting, I have been there and way too obsessed with running and I forgot to have fun. So why is fun important?
It's important, first of all, if you're just, it's important because fun is fun.
Yes.
It is nice to experience fun. But even from a performance perspective, fun is good because, there's this tendency to think when it comes to a sport, you can either be serious and perform well, or you can have fun and not perform well. Well, that's not what the sports psychology research demonstrates. It's actually, we never perform better than when we're having the most fun. The more you enjoy something, the more you invest yourself into the process. So the two actually go hand in hand. And what happens with so many runners is we almost never fall in love with running because of numbers, right? We fall in love with it because we just love the activity or just how it makes us feel. All those things. And then, but what happens is it becomes a sport and we become sort of laser focused on PRs and BQs and all this stuff. And then suddenly we're not running for the same reason we fell in love with it anymore. And it's not fun. And guess what happens? Our performance tanks. And you see this even with elite runners. So just maintaining the fun factor is huge. And a mistake I made early on as a coach, when I started to really focus on teaching pacing with runners, is that sometimes the fun started to be bled out of running for them because because it's really, really hard to perfect. In fact, there's probably no such thing as perfecting pacing. So what I found with some of my runners is that they kept feeling like failures because the pacing wasn't perfect. And I'm like, well, this is no good. We want to work on this pacing thing, but it has to stay fun. So I kind of course corrected and found ways to keep the fun in the process of developing pacing skill.
Yeah, perfect. Make a game out of it. Play some games with yourself. Try to get those paces down perfectly, but with a little bit of humor.
Yeah. And celebrate progress. That's progress is progress. Perfection is unattainable.
Absolutely. I think that is a perfect way to wrap this one up. So Matt, tell everybody where they can find you and all about your new book on pace and when we can get it.
Sure. I guess, the best place to look for the book is 80/20. So I am the publisher of this book. It's the first book I've ever written that I'm also the publisher of.
Nice.
A couple partners and I started our own publishing imprint that's called 80/20 Publishing. And so if you go to 8020books.com, you can read a free sample chapter and order it. My website is mattfitzgerald.org. And then my training website is 8020endurance.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being on the show, Matt. I really appreciate talking to you again. I think this book is super valuable, especially for people who are obsessed with pacing so they can learn to not be so obsessed maybe and learn how to run by feel. I think it's a great piece of work like all your other books are, of course.
I appreciate that. And congratulations on the success of your new podcast. You are very good at what you do, and it's well deserved.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I have more respect for you after writing a book. I don't think I'm ever going to do that again. Yeah. I'm going to leave it to the real writers, but I really appreciate that. So thanks again.
You bet.
And now it's time for the Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. Today's topic is counting. There's lots of ways you can use counting as a mental strength technique when running gets hard. One of my favorites is to use it as a distraction tool when the negative thoughts get too loud when running a tough workout. Counting fills your brain with something neutral instead of negative. You could count your footsteps or your breaths, but what I do is simply count to 20 over and over. I don't go any higher because it starts to change the rhythm. Counting is something you've done since you were a small child, so it takes almost no thought, which is important when running hard. All you do is focus on getting to 20, not about how hard you are running. Before you know it, you're done with the workout, and the negative thoughts never had a chance. Thank you for listening to or watching The Planted Runner, part of the Evergreen Podcasts Network. Don't forget that you can win a copy of my book for leaving an Apple Podcast review, so be sure to write yours right after your run today. Reviews are the #1 way to boost this show's reach, and it's a great way to tell me what you'd like to hear next, because I read every single one. Have a great run today.
There is no hood like parenthood. When you meet a fellow parent, you just kind of get each other on a whole nother level. Hi, I'm Kanika Chadda Gupta. I'm a former CNN journalist, mom of 3, including twins, and host of That's Total Mom Sense, the podcast. I interview changemakers on their life lessons, legacy, and superpower of intuition, aka their mom sense and dad sense. I've had some pretty amazing parents on my show.
Hey, what's up? I'm Kelly Rowland.
Hi, this is Chelsea Clinton. It's me, Bobby Brown. Can't wait to share my story.
Episodes release every Thursday. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Join my tribe at thatstotalmomsense.com and follow me on Instagram at Kanika Chadda Gupta. I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you.